Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, it's lovely to be back here with you today, just you and me. I wanted to share a little bit more to build your anxiety toolkit so that you have a good understanding of anxiety. You can recognize it when it shows up, and you're building your toolkit of skills to manage it, dial it back, and just really put it to the background so that you can get on with creating a rich and full life and teaching those that you care about to do the same. In today's episode, I want to talk about signs and symptoms of anxiety. But I also wanted to begin by letting you know that anxiety is a completely normal human emotion. It's protective. Anxiety is what happens when a part of our brain called the amygdala detects a threat in our environment. When a threat is detected, a cascade of changes occur very quickly, which send us into fight or flight and prepare us to fight the threat or flee to stay safe. When this happens, we respond appropriately, although in our ancestors there were many threats that were genuine threats to safety, whether it be a rival tribe, whether it be a predator of sorts. But today, our anxiety alarm in our brain can often go off and sound the alarm when we perceive that somebody looks at us in an unusual way, or we start imagining something that might happen under certain circumstances when we're attending an event or we're delivering a presentation or when we're applying for a leadership role or whether or not we're sitting an exam or taking a chance of some sort. When our mind fast forwards to the future and imagines a particular outcome, particularly a negative outcome, then the brain will detect that as a threat and the body and the brain react in exactly the same way. Today, I'm talking about how to recognize anxiety and also the difference between normal anxiety and an anxiety condition. Those of you that have listened in will know that I have an anxiety disorder, and I have done since I can reflect on my first symptoms at the age of 4. My anxiety was undiagnosed, undetected for around 20 years. My anxiety was only diagnosed when I experienced major depressive disorder. That was at around the age of 24. At this point, I understood that there was no reason in my life for me to be feeling miserable the way I was. If I had have had a checklist as to the things that I thought might have made my life feel fulfilled and helped me feel happy and content and thriving each and every day, I could have ticked off everything on that list. And yet my mental health was really poor, of course. I was beginning to experience depression, understood that the misery that I was experiencing, the sense of hopelessness that I was experiencing, didn't align with the circumstances of my life. Now, in an episode for another day, I can talk to you about how the circumstances of our life don't tend to contribute as much to our happiness and well-being as we might give them credence for. They certainly do play a role, but that's not what today's about. Through the experience of depression, I was able to recognise something was wrong, and I sought the help of my local GP. And as you know, I often recommend that the GP is a place to go if you're worried about your mental health or the mental health of somebody that you care about. I didn't enjoy experiencing depression. Nobody does. It's an awful experience. And in our episode with Dr. Tim Sharp, he spoke in depth about the experience of living with a severe depressive disorder. And those of you that have had that experience in your own lives know how difficult it is. But I am thankful that that was what brought me to get the help that I needed and was able to set me on the journey to understanding my mental health and has led me here to be with you here today. What I've found in presentations, often presenting in school environments, speaking to groups of parents, particularly before COVID when I've been speaking online, of course, but pre-COVID when I was in a room with people for my presentations, So frequently, I would have a parent approach me after the presentation had ended, and lots of people usually like to come and have a conversation, have a chat, which I absolutely love. And so often a parent would come to me to say, I came here this evening because I wanted to learn more about supporting one of my children or one or more of my children. But in fact, what I've learned tonight is that this was all about me, that I have an anxiety disorder, that I've been struggling with that anxiety my whole life. And up until this point, I never knew. I always found those moments to be really moving because I knew in each of those moments that this person's life was about to change in a really wonderful way, because only once we know and understand what's happening can we take the steps that we need to move forward and to support ourselves and to support other people. We know from the research that there have been parents presenting many, many times over to the emergency department with children who are experiencing severe symptoms of anxiety. And the parents, unable to identify these symptoms as symptoms of anxiety, would present to the ED really worried about the health of their children, only to learn that the signs and symptoms that were showing were because of an anxiety condition that was underlying. And so it can be really frightening when anxiety shows up and it's not well understood. And I think it's also really important to know that anxiety comes and goes under certain circumstances. And we know that normal anxiety comes and goes and for a particular reason. It's an experience for a limited time. It might be, I know I've recently attended our daughter's final assembly for the year at the primary school, and a lot of children who had applied for a leadership role in the school would have been sitting in that assembly feeling anxious, this sense of anticipation and maybe anxiety about, am I going to be successful or not? Maybe their minds were telling them stories about what might happen. Our mind likes to think that there's a bit of a crystal ball, which we in fact know not to be true. Other children might have been feeling anxious about receiving a leadership role, and their mind might have been telling them stories about what might happen when they stood up to walk to the front of the whole school assembly to be presented with their leadership badge. So, normal anxiety tends to have a limited time, and it's in connection with something stressful. It might be an exam, it might be a meeting with the boss. I saw a great post on Instagram where somebody mentioned that that their boss had invited them for a quick chat and said, all good, quick chat, all good. And that was possibly one of the best things that their boss could have done, because that quick chat conversation can send the mind into all sorts of what if and catastrophic thinking when we're asked to go and speak to our supervisor or to a superior in the workplace. I don't have that. I work for myself and I've avoid that type of anxiety, but I know it's something that affects a lot of people. So, normal anxiety comes and goes with the coming and going of a stressor. And it's completely normal for that to happen. It's often very motivating, helps us to prepare better for the stressful event that's approaching. But we know that when there is an anxiety condition present, that the anxiety isn't often related to anything in particular. It's often persistent, frequent, hangs around, and that we can't necessarily pin it down into something that's happened or that's something that's up and coming. And we know that anxiety, when it's becoming a problem, is impacting daily functioning. And so it's worth keeping those ideas in mind as you consider your own anxiety and the anxiety of people around you. We know that anxiety shows in a number of different ways. And so I wanted to spend the rest of this episode talking to you about what to look out for. When I'm presenting, I often break it down into the way anxiety affects how we think, what we feel, and what we do. Or in particular, what we don't do, because we don't like to do the things that make us feel anxious. In light of that, we know that anxiety affects how we feel physiologically. And you may remember from my episode interviewing Karen Young, who wrote Hey Warrior, that in that book she wrote about all of the different ways anxiety makes us feel differently in our body. We experience a lot of sensations in our body when anxiety shows. And in her book, her beautifully illustrated book, she explains it for children, although I recommend that book for anybody who'd like to understand a bit more of anxiety. I know my own personal experience was that I would have a lot of worries and a really sick tummy when I was a young child. My sick tummy was my first symptom, and we know that an upset tummy is very common. We also know that digestion is not a life-saving function of the body when we are faced with a threat. When our alarm in our brain has detected a threat, there is no need for digestion, and henceforth, blood from the digestive tract is redirected to the parts of the body that may need it. The arms and the legs for punching and fighting and kicking and running get more blood flow. And the blood is diverted away from the stomach. And that's one of the reasons that we can get that feeling of butterflies or that feeling of sickness. Some people do vomit when they're highly anxious, and it can also send people running to the toilet often or more frequently. And so that's a big challenge. That can be a really big challenge. Other reasons people experience physical symptoms all relate to the protective nature of anxiety. The racing heart is so that the heart can pump more oxygenated blood around the body so that that oxygen is available for the production of energy for fighting or fleeing. We also know that the oxygen, we need more oxygen under those circumstances. So that's why breathing changes. And you can often experience that change in respiration rate. Another symptom that I've experienced with anxiety for a very long time, and it's my predominant symptom now that is a telltale sign for me that anxiety is bubbling up, is that I struggle to get a full breath. I've often been breathing in quite a shallow way for a period of time, and I realize that I'm not able to sort of get that full satisfying deep breath. And so that can be a sign of anxiety bubbling up. And the idea is when we can recognize the signs that are showing up, we can start to put practices into place straight away to help manage those symptoms so that the anxiety response doesn't continue to amp up to the point where we're not able to think straight, we're not able to do the things that we need to do in that moment. Other symptoms that we can feel when we're anxious include this tingling in our hands or in our arms or a shakiness. You know, when I played basketball or when I used to play netball, if I was happened to be captain of the team and I'd need to sign the sheet after playing sport at a high intensity, I'd be really shaky. And that's because of the adrenaline that's released into the bloodstream. Adrenaline's released into the bloodstream when we're anxious as well. And it's a huge part of what puts us on alert and prepares our body to be able to act in a way to keep ourselves safe. We can also experience perspiration, get sweaty, because the brain's anticipating fighting or flight. And when that happens, we're going to get hot. And so the body's cooling mechanisms turn on, and hence we start to sweat. And that's one of the things that we can often notice, and we can get those telltale signs showing up if we're feeling a little bit nervous or a little bit anxious about something. Some people with the racing heart can experience chest pain. And of course, you would never ignore chest pain. It's really important to make sure that you're well aware that if that is happening, that it's safe and that it's not something that's going to be related to another medical condition of sorts. We get a lot of muscle tension when we're anxious because the muscles pre-tense so that we are again in a position to be able to keep ourselves safe because the brain has detected a threat. These are just some of the ways that anxiety affects how we feel in our body. These are sensations that show up when we feel anxious. We also know that anxiety affects how we feel emotionally, and we can have a lot of really big feelings. We can feel teary and we can feel angry. The anger side of things can be that fight or flight. I know sometimes mums can, if something happens with their children and they're feeling anxious about an injury or an illness or something that sometimes that anxiety can come through as anger, because that fight or flight response can be accompanied by anger and tears and big emotions. When it comes to our thinking, oh goodness, we know anxiety can affect our thinking as well. And worry is one of those classic symptoms of anxiety. You might experience a lot of worry yourself. You might know someone or care for someone who experiences a lot of worry, a lot of catastrophizing, a lot of what if thinking. That's really common with anxiety. And the brain is trying to solve the problem of this threat at hand, and so focuses a lot of attention on that problem in an effort to try to solve it. But in actual fact, it reinforces the threat and amplifies the anxious response. Intrusive thoughts can be a sign of, well, obsessive and compulsive disorder, which is a condition where anxiety is absolutely present. And a lot of rumination, just going over and over and over things in our minds, can be the thinking side effects of anxiety when it shows up. In terms of what we do when we're anxious, this this can affect people, and it's really worth noting that when anxiety shows up, it does affect people in different ways. And so not everybody will experience exactly the same signs and symptoms. So what I'm sharing with you today are just some of the symptoms that can be experienced. And today's episode is not about a diagnosis, not about you being able to make a diagnosis, but for you to have an awareness that there are signs and symptoms when it comes to anxiety, to be able to recognize them and to be able to put strategies into place when the symptoms that you experience start to show, so that you're in a position to be able to notice them, recognize them for what they are, and take the appropriate action. So the behavioural symptoms are many, and avoidance is one of the key ones. Avoidance is really common because when anxiety shows up, it's natural to want to avoid whatever it is that is causing us to feel as we feel. And we know that there is a cycle of avoidance, which I'll come back to in another episode. So it's a self-fulfilling cycle where you avoid something, you feel immediately better that you don't have to do that thing that provokes the anxiety. The brain goes, good decision, good decision. We're feeling a lot better here. That must have been exactly the right thing to do. And of course, that makes doing that tough, hard thing that much harder the next time that opportunity presents. We know that it's easy to numb out, and so it can be easy to scroll on Instagram or numb out using food or using drink. We know that some of the things that we can do when we're anxious is grinding our teeth. I have a plate that I wear to bed at night because I'd been grinding my teeth for a very long time, and your dentist will hopefully be able to help you identify if that's something that you might need as well. We can use other unhelpful coping strategies, and one of the other things that we can often do is seek a lot of reassurance. And that was something I did as a child and as a young adult. Even when married to Pete, I would seek a lot of reassurance until I was in a position to be able to recognize my own anxiety, my own thinking, and develop the skills that I needed to be able to manage my own worries in a really powerful way. And I've started to share some of those strategies with you in other episodes as well. So these are just some of the ways that anxiety shows. And as I said, it is something that is unique and presents differently for different people. It's helpful if you can start to understand anxiety for what it is, that the body reacts to prepare us to stay safe. The thing is, we're reacting all the time when we have an anxiety condition to threats that are sometimes not even within our conscious recognition. Last week, I popped into a health food store to have a look at their Christmas decorations, which was so beautiful in the window, and to have a look at an essential oil I needed, some more tea tree. The moment I walked into that shop, the essential oil blend that they were using in the shop that day immediately triggered my anxiety response, because it took me way back to another time in my life when I worked in a place that used to use that same blend or a blend of a similar nature. And it was a place that was a great place to work for a while and then wasn't. And so it was amazing how even the sense of smell can trigger that sort of a response. And so that part of our brain, the amygdala, is taking in information from our environment through our senses and quickly making a determination as to whether or not there is a threat to our safety. And so we need to be able to show our brain we're safe. And by doing deep, strong breathing, by being able to recognize that we're having an anxiety response, being able to slow our breathing, focus on a long exhale, using our diaphragm so that we're activating the vagus nerve. This is just one of the ways that we can start to really settle our system and show our amygdala that we're okay. We're okay, and you can stand down and the symptoms and the signs of anxiety that you've been experiencing will start to settle. So that's it from me for today. I thank you again for joining me. But before I go, I wanted to read out on the podcast a beautiful review that Amanda, one of my beautiful listeners, has shared as a review on the podcast platform, on the Apple podcast platform, to let me know just the difference that the podcast is making for her. So Amanda wrote this, and I thank you, Amanda, from the bottom of my heart, because I'm making this podcast for this reason, to really make a difference for people just like you. And I do read all the reviews, and I will start sharing more. And, one of the things that you can do if you are enjoying the podcast and finding it helpful is to write a review for me, but also to let other people know. So I hope that there's a ripple effect with this podcast, that the right people who need it find it, and they can do that if you're willing to share it amongst your friends and family. So this is what Amanda writes. In a moment of desperation, when I recognized that I needed to try and do something about the way I am constantly catastrophizing, I searched anxiety in Apple Podcasts and found Dr. Jodi. Thank goodness. She writes goodness in capital letters. The way she speaks about anxiety triggers and, most importantly, strategies to help these thoughts is truly comforting. I found myself immediately at ease and empowered to start taking control of my thoughts. I highly recommend this podcast to anyone with anxiety and anxious tendencies. Amanda, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to know that you've found new strategies, new tools for your toolkit, and I am committed to continuing to bring to you interviewees who can share light and shine a light on their own experiences and share their expertise with you. And I'll continue to add to your toolkit bit by bit over time. So for now, I wish you all a wonderful break over the summer period. No matter where you're tuning in from. I know I've got listeners in the UK, so you'll be coming up to a cold summer, well, a cold winter, should I say. And for those of you here in Australia, in my home country, I wish you a wonderful break. It's been a really difficult couple of years, and so I really hope that you get some downtime and really prioritise some rest and some fun. I will be doing exactly that. All right, take care. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.